Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Peter Stark, who is known as one of America's most dynamic negotiation speakers and authors. His consulting firm, Peter Barron Stark Companies, has attracted clients such as the Boston Red Sox, Electronic Arts, Coca-Cola, Jack in the Box, and HP, to name but a few. He has been published worldwide with over 500 articles and has written 10 books, including his best-selling book on negotiation, The Only Negotiation Guide You'll Ever Need, which will be the focus of today's program. Welcome to the program, Peter.
Charles, I'm glad to be here.
So I always like to start off with asking my guests, what got you interested in this topic, and give us a little bit of background about yourself.
So what got me interested in the topic is from about 1980 to 1988, I owned a commercial printing company in San Diego. And the one thing you could guarantee in the commercial printing business, there was competition. There were 650 competitors in the San Diego market, and any one of them would steal your mama for a quarter if they could. And it just got very competitive and very tough. At the same time I was owning this printing company, I was teaching at San Diego State in their certificate of leadership and certificate of management and certificate of sales programs. And one day they asked me, what do you want to teach this semester? And I said, I want to teach negotiation. And they said, well, have you ever taught negotiation before? And I said, no, I haven't, but that's exactly why I want to teach it. I want to teach it. I'm going to write a book on it. And I also want to get really good at it. And so that was really the start of my negotiating career. And all of the students I had in my classes, I used to teach Monday night, 6:30 to 9:30. Every single one of them was in business, had a job. And they were one of the ones that started to pull me into their companies and say, we want to do this negotiation skills training. And then in 2002, I got a signing with Random House, a division of Broadway Books, to write a book on negotiation. And originally the book was called Everyone Negotiates. And it's one of the few negotiations in my life I lost because I had tested that. I had focus group tested it, and I knew I had the right title for the mass market. And in the end, I said, so what are we going to do? And they basically said, we're Random House and we know what we're doing. And it's going to be called The Only Negotiating Guide. And that book now has sold almost 200,000 copies. And they had me republish it with all the electronic negotiation stuff in 2016.
But maybe they were right.
You know what? They actually, it's one that if I hadn't had that title, it wouldn't have sold as well as it did. They were right.
Well, that's great. And I love to jump into that book now because that's a lot to unpack in that very practical guidebook on negotiation. So let's start with a negotiation usually ends in one of four outcomes. So if you could just unpack that a little bit for us and let us know which one of those four is really the preferred outcome of a negotiation.
Okay, so the four that are the most common are the win-win, which both parties get their needs and goals met. You have the win-lose or lose-win, and you say, well, what's the difference between those? It all depends on which side of the fence you end up on, whether you're the loser or the winner. What we do know is usually this: the loser, if given the choice, does not want to come back and renegotiate at a later time. And then the fourth one is also common, the lose-lose outcome, where both parties don't get their needs and goals met, and both parties are willing to walk away. Now, there's actually a fifth one, and I think I'm the only author that has put this fifth one into writing. There's no outcome. Why did I say that there's no outcome? It's, let's say you were a car dealer and I was buying a car, and I go in and negotiate in this car, and you take me into the closing room. And then all of a sudden I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach that this is not going well. And so I make the decision that I'm going to walk out of the dealership. And actually they chased me out in the parking lot, but I end up walking away. I actually say that's an example of not win-lose or lose-win. There's no outcome. And the reason is I'm going to drive across town to another dealership, and I'm going to buy the exact same car that I was negotiating on. and they're going to take the car that I thought was my dream car I was negotiating on, and I walked, and they're going to sell it to someone else. In both of those next instances, it was probably win-win. But the challenge with people is when they look at it as a lose, they tend to stay longer to try and make it a win. Whereas in my case, I didn't trust this dealer. And usually when your guts say that you don't trust someone, your guts are usually right. But your head will argue with your guts and say, guts, if we can just get another $500 off the price of this car, then it would be a worthwhile deal. If you don't trust the relationship or trust the organization you're negotiating with, I seldom seen those work out really well long term.
That's some great insight with the no outcome, because that's one that I haven't read in other books. And you mentioned too that that win-win is the ideal outcome of almost all negotiations, because not only both parties gain and have a positive feeling, but they want to negotiate in the future, which I think you bring up a critical point with the win-lose or lose-win. Yes, the winner won, but future possibilities of negotiation might be shut down with that individual moving forward.
Right. So most times, if the loser has a choice, they will refuse to come back to the bargaining table and negotiate again. If they don't have a choice, it's thank you, may I have another? It's not going to go well again. The neat thing about win-win, and I'm in my 33rd year as a consultant with clients, and many of the clients I've had for over 20 or 25 years, is the beauty of win-win is when both parties trust each other. It takes about an eighth of the time to negotiate something than if there's no trust in the relationship. What's really interesting about my business when it comes to the world of consulting and speaking, everybody has a contract. In 33 years, I may have had 5 contracts. I just work with people, most are off of referrals, and I will tell them this: if you aren't happy with my work, I need you to know there's no charge. I've never had to do that, but I need you to know if you want a contract, I'll put a contract together for you, but I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and I'm going to achieve the goal. And so when there is trust there, it's just much faster.
I agree with you completely on that one. Let's focus on that win-win, because I'd love to identify some of the keys or key characteristics in a win-win outcome.
One of the biggest characteristics in a win-win outcome is that we have transparency in the relationship. And you say in a negotiation, the only time you ever get points for being honest is when it costs you something to be honest. If there's no cost for you to be honest, you get 0 points for being honest. And so many times in a negotiation, I'm going to actually look for something. And an example would be, I need you to know that you can hire me and I could do this training, but I'm going to tell you it is not going to solve your problem. This is a leader issue. This is not a employee issue that we need to train the employees on how they need to respond or how they need to act. We need to actually work with the leaders on how they need to hold people accountable and how they need to train people. And in that instance where I say, I can do it and I can take your money, but I'm going to also tell you that is not going to solve your problem, is an example of being honest. But it's costing me something to be honest, because sometimes it's just somebody who wants to do a training session. A boss has said, get a trainer in there. And that's all they want. I'm not the right person.
Well, you mentioned too, which is somewhat counterintuitive until I read the explanation, is that if you want more likely or a greater likelihood of creating that win-win, avoid narrowing the negotiation down to just one issue.
Yeah. And the one issue we almost always negotiation down is price. And the minute you negotiate down to one issue, you really are setting up a winner and a loser in that particular situation. I'd use a real recent example. I've been a boater almost all my adult life. And in 2019, I sold my last boat and went about 3 years. And all of a sudden I got the itch. And on this boat I just negotiated on, I negotiated a significant amount off of the price. But the person I bought it from was 85 years old. He lives in Colorado and he's not in good health. And what I did say is, if you can meet this price, because I can't do it at the asking price, you don't even have to come back to the boat. You can tell me whatever you want. I'll ship it to you and I'll take everything else off the boat. And so this was one where you say, well, price is the last thing. It actually was the deal clincher, for him not to have to take his walker and come all the way out and go through all of the, what I want to call walking through up and down a boat, which he was not well versed to do at this point, was an example where what I call threw another ball into the air so that there's two balls now that we can juggle, not just one. The minute you narrow it down to one ball, you really set up to win, lose, and it's not successful.
I agree with you. Another key insight is, which I think a lot of people assume, is that they know or they think that the counterparty to the negotiation has the same needs and wants as they do. But that's the wrong assumption to make, right?
Yeah, it is. It is the wrong assumption to make, because if I automatically assumed that price is his number one deal making point because it's my deal making point, many times I'm not going to be able to structure a win-win deal, because almost always your counterpart has different needs and goals than you do. I'll throw out a fun one. Some people in negotiation have a need just to be liked or to like you. A hardball negotiator that's going to go only after price doesn't even contemplate that that might be a need for somebody else. And so therefore the person jinxes the deal, and it really doesn't matter what the price was. In their head, they're saying this: I don't like you. And if I don't like you, this deal's not going to work. And so I do say this: the easier it is to work with you and get along with you, the easier it is to negotiate with you. And based on my research, the most difficult people to negotiate with are yellers, screamers, and swearers. And what's interesting about them as a negotiation strategy, they don't have a lot of strategies and tactics. And yes, why don't they have a lot of strategies and tactics? It's because they don't need them. If yelling, swearing, and being a bully works, as long as you know the counters to that strategy, you can render them pretty much useless in a negotiation. So let's say, Charles, you were a yeller and a screamer. In the second round of the negotiation, I might just go to you and say, Charles, you got to promise me that at least once in the negotiation, you're going to blow a gasket and yell at me. Do you promise me you'll do that just once? Because if you ask for it, it renders it absolutely useless as a strategy.
That's a great tactic.
Yeah, throw another tactic is this, Charles: most people don't feel a need to yell at me or swear at me, but you do. And I was just curious why. The third one is my favorite one. Oh, sometimes I just look at somebody and say, Charles, most people get pretty upset when you yell or scream, but just between me and you, I kind of like it.
Those are three great ones, because you're right. Those are difficult people in any negotiation to sit across the table from, or in any kind of dealing, personal or professional. What would you say are the most critical elements of any negotiation? You have three in your book: time, information, and power. Maybe we can just kind of touch upon it, but maybe go into the one that you think is the most important.
Yeah, so all three can be important at different times. If I just take the power one, seldom does one side have all of the power. And so when I negotiate with big corporations or corporate America and I'm training them, they'll say, I'm telling you, they have all the power. And so my two favorite questions are, number one, will they return your email or your text, or will they take your call? And they go, yeah, they'll take my call, they'll return my email or text, but they hold all the power. I said, let me actually ask another question. If they did hold all the power, why would they return your email, your text, or your call? They would be saying, I don't even want you, but they want something. So they're returning the call or the email or the text. And almost always, I'm one to say this: the power is pretty equally balanced. And if I just use this one word, if there's any competition involved, almost always power can be more easily balanced if there's a competitive environment that we're working in terms of buying or selling. So that's the first one. Power almost always is pretty equally balanced if there's a relationship. In terms of time, I'm going to say this. For years, I talked about the 80-20 rule, and that was 80% of the negotiations are resolved in the last 20% of time. But I've learned in time that we don't know exactly where that 80-20% is. And I've also learned this: almost always you can move the time. And so when I taught negotiation San State, I'd send out people with this crazy exercise. You got to go buy something on sale, get all the way up to the counter, get ready to pay for it, and then say this: you know what? I'm actually short on money. Can I just have the sales price extended for 2 weeks because I'm going to get paid? And they go, well, we can't do that because it's a sale. And if it's, just extended forever, it would be the sale, it'd be the price. Is it possible I could talk to a manager and explain my situation to them? And I use that as an example because almost always you have the ability to extend the time. I remember one time I bought a copier. The copier salesperson said, this discount is only good to the 31st of the month. And I had 3 of my staff in this meeting because they'd done all the research. And I looked at this guy and I just said, that is so sad. And he said, what do you mean it's so sad? I said, our company has a formal written policy not to buy copiers until the 15th of the month. And if you can't get it to me on the 15th, I said, we might as well just call this meeting quits. And this guy looked at me, he said, well, let me see if I can get my manager to approve it till the 15th. I said, I would really appreciate that. So after he walked out, my staff goes, what did you just do? I said, I was practicing, just practicing moving the deadline because I don't like it when people tell me when I got to do something by. It's just practice. I said, when he calls back and he's got approval, just tell him we'll do it today.
How about for information? The one thing I like about that information piece is that, which I think people really need to know when they go into the negotiation, whenever you know less about a topic being negotiated, then your counterpart knows you're at risk. So you need to be prepared.
So a couple of things on information is number one, there's always more information out there than you think there is available. In today's world, if you can't find what you're looking for, you're just not searching the right way. And so today's world, you have a lot more reasons to be prepared for a negotiation and to use that as strength in the negotiation. But I'm also going to tell you this. There are times when I will say to someone, I actually don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to research it and get back to you. And the reason why I do that is because I'm being honest when it costs me something to be honest, which is going to, I believe, pay me dividends in the end of this relationship or negotiation. But I'm also saying this, I am going to research it because in negotiation, if you bluff something, you indirectly say this, possibly I lack confidence and I'll bluff the next thing, which then on the other side of the fence, I may now try to bluff you on what you just bluffed. And that could be expensive in a negotiation.
I agree with you. I always get this question with any topic to say, what are the key principles, the rules that we should know going into a negotiation or starting down a certain type of thinking or leadership topic? I think you list 5 different rules that you should know when going in or entering into a negotiation.
The number one is this: I want to be well prepared for the negotiation so that I have confidence in the negotiation. The second thing that is, I believe, absolutely critical is that I'm well prepared and I also have a positive vision of the outcome. And what I mean by a positive vision in a negotiation, there's 3 types of visions. Number one is a positive vision. And that is, if anybody can structure this as a long-term win-win deal, I can do it. And I really did in the middle of this negotiation, the vision just became very clear for me of what I could do to help this person that was buying the boat, who's a wonderful, wonderful human being, is that what could I do to help that? And if anybody could pull this off, I could pull this off. Vision number 2 is what I call vision of the status quo. And that is, I just want to, you got 7 cookies and I got 7 cookies. And I just want to keep enough cookies that I can eat. I want to try to hang on. And vision number 3 is I know I'm going to lose in this negotiation. And there are some people who truly believe they are going to lose going into the negotiation. So in terms of being well prepared, that's probably one of the most important keys to be successful. I once worked with a construction firm who was charging cost overruns, and the company that I also supported was trying to get the cost overruns reduced. And when I asked the construction company what was their vision and what was their goal for the negotiation, they basically told me, we're just going into the meeting to check them out and see where they're at. And I thought, this is the kiss of death, because whoever says, well, it was 1 million, but it's actually 3 million, or it was 1 million, but it's actually only 250,000, whoever opens up and sets the framing point is going to be the driver of that negotiation.
Those are some great tips as you're going into a negotiation. So now that you're prepared, now that you have those rules identified and you have some understanding of what it's going to take to win, in your book, you list three different counterparts that you're sitting across the table from. They could be sharks, they could be carp, or they could be dolphins. Could you go through each one of those? And I think you in the book had stated that really the dolphins are really the ideal animal you want to be associated with, right?
Yeah, so this is really a fun one for me because carps go into the negotiation believing that they're going to lose. Sharks go into the negotiation believing that they're going to win at all cost, and you are actually going to lose. The dolphin, and where I came up with this example, I had the privilege of 2 times working with the trainers of SeaWorld of San Diego. And what I learned from them is you could take this dolphin and you could stick them in a carp pool, a shark pool, or the whale pool, and they do equally well with each of those animals. They just change their behavior radically and rapidly, depending on who they're negotiating with. And the same thing in a negotiation. I want to be a dolphin because if I get bit by a shark, and here would be an example, they lied to me. I need you to know at that point, I'm going to be using strategies rapidly to deal with the shark. And you ask, what could one of those shark-like strategies is? You said you were going to do this for me, and now you tell me you don't and won't. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove something from your side that I previously gave up, and I'm taking it back. And why that strategy works with a shark is they are possessed not to lose anything and to win at all costs. And I focus 100% of their energy trying to get back something already gave up. Because if I don't do that, they're going to shift their focus to go try and steal something else from me and move it to their side of the fence. And so by changing their thinking, and it's really fast to do with the shark, onto something that you gave up, but now you're taking back, just saves you from getting bitten somewhere else again.
That's a great analogy. And ideally, you'd want to be a dolphin in the negotiation, but likely you probably would want to negotiate with carps or sharks because they're a little bit easier maybe to negotiate with. Now, we talked about negotiation types, but can you give us a little bit of insight into negotiating style? Because you have the amiable, which you kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, drivers, you have the analyticals, and then the blends. But just kind of give us an overview of what those four types are so we can properly identify what category we fall into.
So you're going to figure out people's categories by the questions they ask and the topics that they talk about. And so I talked about the amiable or the supporter. They have a high need to be able to support, to be able to be helpful, and they also have a high need to be liked and loved. So if you're a bully, that amiable is going to not do the deal with you, but they're also not going to return your email or your call from that point forward. Because once they get out, they have one goal: don't ever get back in your presence again. The driver, their implicit need is accomplishment, to get something done. And so the driver wants to go in and do this deal as fast as they can so they can get it crossed off the list. And they are more focused on success than they are perfection. So there's a flaw in the deal. We'll fix it. Okay. We'll get it later. It's down the road. The analytical has a high need for a perfect negotiation versus a successful negotiation. The analytical has a high need to know every detail and to know every fact and to know every option. And I also want to say this: the high analytical can be a little cynical because they know you're trying to get them, but they just don't know how yet. And that's why they will take longer in the negotiation stall. One of my very favorite examples in a seminar is a woman came up to me and she said, "You're so right about the behavioral style stuff." She said, "My husband took 6 months to buy a car." And she said he had a spreadsheet with the makes of the car up here and all the options down here. So he finally narrows it down to one car. And he takes me out in it, takes for me to drive, and he says, "What do you think?" She says, "It just doesn't feel right to me." And he looked at her and he says, "There ain't no feelings on this spreadsheet." And that really is the difference between the amiable, who's really focused on the relationship and feelings and emotion. The analytical has zero need for emotion and feeling. In fact, in the book I wrote, you can get anything you want from a high analytical just by doing this. Charles, would you just hold my hand as I cry? They'll give up the world to get out of a meeting or a negotiation where there's high emotion involved. They are not comfortable. So all of the styles will move from one style to another, but it's only the hub that can do this, or the blend, without thinking about it. Because if the amiable says this, I need to be more assertive in this negotiation, I need to tell, I'm not doing that. It is a conscious decision they move to shift. If the assertive director decides this, I just need to keep my mouth shut and maybe ask a question. It is a conscious decision to keep their mouth shut and to ask a question. The analytical, if they are going to make the decision just to do it and get this done, it's a conscious decision that they're actually making to get it done. The blend, they can actually shift from one meeting to the next, depending on the situation and depending on the counterpart, and they can do it without thinking.
So would that be the preferred style then, or is there a preferred style?
People a lot of times will ask, is the best CEO, are they the assertive director type of person? And my answer is no. I work with CEOs of all the different styles. The best negotiator has the ability to shift their style depending on the situation. When I started to what I call feel who this person, the boat owner was that I was negotiating with, I shifted, became much more amiable. Once we had negotiated the price, then I just wanted to get the deal done. I just wanted to get the deal done. And then there was questions about whether he wasn't going to come out, and then the deal got extended. I went totally amiable and just said this, it's on his time, make it work. That is so against who I am. I'm a bottom line, results oriented person. I want to cross this off the list. I want to get the deal done. That's not who I was in this deal. I shifted to a style that is actually my least of the preferred styles.
That's a great insight. Before we end, I want to talk about some of these practical strategies. You list a lot in your book, but let's first talk about strategies when you're negotiating on email or text. Can you give a couple of those that you have found to be effective or maybe unique to that medium?
The email is a whole different world of negotiation because you have a lot more time to negotiate. And here would be one example. One of the benefits of the email negotiation is I email you and ask a question, will you do X? And you have the choice at that point to answer it. You have the choice to say, hey, I want you to know I talked to my boss and my boss said no, but I really worked hard to try and get it for you. And so there's a lot of advantages to this email negotiation in terms of what works. One of the strategies is this, I'm going to change it up. I'm going to use a phone call. I'm going to go see them in person, maybe changing up the strategy if negotiations by email is not working. And that's really one of the cases. Sometimes people don't respond by email. Kind of a fun one. I recently called somebody to do an air conditioner repair. He didn't call me back. I emailed him. He didn't email me back. I don't have a lot of options at that point, except in the world of air conditioning, there's a lot of competitors. So it's a tough one, but I give 15 tips of people what you can do in the email negotiations. What's the advantages and what's the disadvantages of that email negotiation?
Well, I know it's a lot easier to say no, and it's much easier to bluff on an email. Do you find more negotiations are happening that way, or do you still see the majority are happening live and in person?
I actually use something that I call conceptual agreement and then follow up by email. So if somebody was to ask, how much would this cost? I'm going to make up a round number. It's approximately $10,000. If I am in the ballpark and that seems like it would be a fit for your organization, I can put together a statement of work or proposal. Would that work? And so in this situation, I'm trying to keep at least some of the major deal points verbal, because once they tell me, you know what, that actually seems reasonable and that would work, then it's easier to follow up by phone or by email if needed.
How about for the live in-person negotiations? You give, I think it's 101 tactics in the book. We don't have time to unpack all those, obviously, but a few of them maybe we can get to before the end of the episode. And I'll start out with the one that I like, which I think it's kind of a trite phrase, but you say it's a great way to practice your negotiation skills, is to simply get in the habit of asking salespeople, is this their best offer?
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite. I actually had the students at San Diego State go out and practice that one. And in person, you have to look at them in the eye and say this, Charles, I want to ask you a question. Is that absolutely your best offer? And then shut up. Don't say a word, because Their words next are going to tell you, is that their best offer? Or if they stutter or hesitate, it's going to tell you there's a really good chance somebody else is getting the best price. If they said to me, this truly is my best price ever, I might, if I felt like that wasn't a really honest response, I may say, then I actually want to think about this and I'll get back to you. And why I use that as a counter, because there's a really good chance they're going to call me and they say, you know what, I've got a one-time exception to this best price offer is I really want your business. And that's one where now I probably do have their best price ever. Another counter or another tactic in the book, which is really an important one, just daily in life, is don't ever say yes to the first offer. Let's just say this, I'm selling a car, Charles, I'm selling for $10,000. And you look at me and you say, Peter, I'll tell you what, I'll give you five. Half. And I look at you and I go, sold. There's two thoughts that rush through your head at that moment. Thought number one is, I should have offered three. I lost. And thought number two, there's something wrong with this car. He was much too fast to drop it 50%. And you're going to tell me this, I got three other cars I want to look at today, and I'm going to go look at them. And if this is still the best car at the end of the day, we'll be back for the $5,000. And so you always want to counter. And even if they give you the perfect price, you could say this, I will accept the $5,000 under one condition, Charles. You got five Chris $1,000 bills, or you will got all cash. That would be my one way I would accept that. And that is what I call countering a perfect offer. I'm still countering something.
I agree. Another one that I find that's quite common, that's a difficult person to negotiate with, is when they're playing a broken record and they're a unilateral thinker who could only see one possible outcome to the negotiation. It's either my way or the highway. And what I love about your book, and I'd hope that you can give us some tips on countering, each one of those strategies, those tips, you have the counter that's effective against that type of negotiator. So playing a broken record, it's my way or the highway. I'm not going to budge. How do you deal with that person?
So it depends on what their style is, but there's a really good chance I'm going to ask this question. Charles, you've asked me 10 times to do X. I want to ask you a question. If you were in my shoes, how would you justify agreeing to that? And why that's powerful is almost always there's silence on the other side, because that's one question they never thought about. And as soon as I hit silence, I go, I'm struggling with the same problem.
Love all of these tips. It's been a great episode. As we end the episode, just like to leave our listeners with a call to action. What is one thing that our listeners could do to become a better negotiator right away?
Practice things like never saying yes to the first offer. Number two, raise their level of expectation. If you're thinking of offering $500, raise your level of expectation. Offer $250. You can always go up. It's very difficult to go down after you've set a price in someone's mind. And so if your goal was, let's say, $1,000, I'm going to say this, don't ever go in at your goal, because then you're going to be negotiating away from your goal, because they're going to say, well, I could do it if it was $1,250. If you went in at $750, you're actually going to be negotiating closer to your goal versus away from your goal. So those would be two really important tips that would be helpful to our listeners.
Thank you, Peter, for joining me today. Got a lot out of this program, and I know that our listeners did as well.
Thank you, Charles. I enjoyed this.
Let our listeners know how they can reach out to you and get in contact with you.
So I'm real easy to connect with. I'm Peter at peterstark.com. My website is peterstark.com. And we got a lot of resources in negotiation and leadership to help support you.
Thank you again. And this concludes this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe. This podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify. It can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.